A tale of the Holy Cross of Jesus Christ. Truly this man was the Son of God. By R.D. Cruz. Dedicated to my father Pelagio. As narrated by the author himself. Illustration by Kurt Miller Studios. Part 1 of 8. So the soldiers approached the condemned man, and they realized that the two thieves were still alive, so they broke their legs with a hammer to hasten their deaths. When they approached Jesus and saw he was already dead, they did not break his legs. However, the centurion, just to be sure that the sentence will be carried out, he pulled a lance and pierced his side and stabbed his heart. Immediately, blood and water gushed forth from Jesus' side. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled. Thus, a bone of him shall not be broken. And again another scripture said, they shall look on him whom they pierced. Narcissus, the centurion, was born and lived in Pompeii. Their house overlooked the majestic peak of the dormant volcano Mount Vesuvius. His father, Alphonsus Bodicia, fought alongside with General Octavian, who later became Emperor Augustus Caesar. The Roman forces defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium. A bust of his grandfather stood in the main hall of the house. His father, Horatio Bodicia, was a decorated war hero, and as tribune, fought with General Tiberius against the Germanic forces before he became emperor. Horatio subdued the barbarians menacing the towns near the Rhine River. His mother, meanwhile, was the great-granddaughter of the late Senator Sulla. Narcissus had the best education and upbringing, including military training like his father. He attended a school for boys called the Athenaeum of Pompeii, wherein he read classics in Latin and Greek, studied astronomy, geography, mathematics, and even strenuous physical exercises like wrestling. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was a school patron and also protector of Athens, the ancient city of Greece. He also had a learned Jewish nanny named Carmilla, who provided all his childhood needs. Little Narcissus loved to hear from her the Bible stories. She would start relating, the world has turned evil, so God decided to eliminate all except for one good man and his family. God commanded him to build a big boat, an ark, and to parade inside all the animals, pair by pair, including his family, for 40 days and 40 nights in rain until it stopped. The boat finally settled when the soil has dried up. Another story was, man has become too powerful because everybody spoke only one language. The king decided to build a tower so high it almost reached the heavens. The king shot an arrow into the sky from the tower to taunt God. But God was so angry, so he changed the people to speak different languages, thus creating total confusion. The tower was never finished. Camilla sang to him in Aramaic to put him to sleep. Sometimes Camilla's son, Matteo, with his father, came over to visit Pompeii. Matteo's father was a successful and avid businessman. Narcissus' family was very religious, worshipping Father Zeus and Vesta. The latter was worshipped by keeping an open flame in the kitchen all throughout the day and night to perpetuate eternal happiness for the home. Narcissus grew up to be a soldier of the Roman army, following the footsteps of his father and grandfather. He was easily promoted to the rank of centurion with his family's influence. His first assignment was a small town outside of Mainz in Germania. As a send-away gift, his mother packed 30 pieces of silver in a pouch. Although it was a backward town, Narcissus aggressively developed it with his agricultural and infrastructure projects. He built roads and bridges and schools to teach Greek and Latin to the young. By establishing canals from the Rhine River, he irrigated the farmlands, thus creating fertile soil. He created a town market day to transport all the goods to the big market in Mainz. A squad of soldiers accompanied the merchants for protection against thieves and criminals. The locals, who used to be practically paupers, became prosperous and happy. His soldiers also benefited with plenty of donated free food and necessities from the locals. So the collection of taxes in the end was no longer an issue for Narcissus. One time the barbarians crossed the Rhine into the town led by Vincentius the Conqueror. They looked very hostile and intimidating with their long blonde hair, wearing pointed helmets and furry outfit. The Roman garrison went into full alert. The townsfolk went into a total panic, ready to evacuate. The whole cohort went into full formation to challenge the outside threat. However, the Germans, instead of drawing their swords, they laid out their fur skins and meat made from bear, beaver, and deer. Vincentius signaled, and they all stretched out their empty hands to announce they were not armed. They wanted to trade. Even if there was no common language, barter made the communication easy. Then their leader Vincentius spoke through an interpreter. "Let us trade, our deer meat for a pair of shoes, or a tin frying pan, or our bear skin for our latest dress." It ended well for all sides, the Romans, the townsfolk, and the Germans, with a sumptuous feast afterwards. After 3 years, Narcissus was getting bored, so he joined the 10th Legion of Pontius Pilate, governor of the volatile country of Judea. His first task was to conduct surveillance regarding probable Jewish rebel activities. He also oversaw the collection of taxes by the Jewish publicans. Narcissus hired a migrant worker from Cyrene, Africa, named Simon, to perform menial and janitorial duties. Simon was also responsible to provide the crosses for crucifixions, which occurred regularly. Simon fashioned the wood from the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane. Also, Narcissus had close ties with a Jewish palace captain named Malchus. They both succeeded in arresting the Jewish troublemaker Barabbas, even before any blood was drawn. Barabbas was sentenced to die on the cross for rebellion without any necessary trial. Narcissus also apprehended the two thieves, Demas and Hestus, who at the time of the robbery had killed accidentally the homeowner. It was meant to be a prank. The two had been drinking heavily until they dared one another to rob the rich trader of olive oil. The house occupants were also asleep, so it was easy for the two to extract a chest full of silver coins. They even had time to count the silver coins, including the pieces of precious jewelry. It must have been at least 1,000 pieces of silver. Unfortunately, the owner woke up, got out of bed, and tried to apprehend them with his dagger. Demas quickly held the man's arms, but Hestus grabbed the weapon and pierced the man's heart. The man died instantly, but they still took the loot before escaping. However, the wife has awakened and has seen their faces. Narcissus and Malchus eventually found them both drunk in a small dining place outside Jerusalem. They only had 30 pieces of silver left from their possession. During the trial before Pilate, the victim's wife pointed her finger and identified them. "They were the one who did it. I saw their faces," she recalled. Pilate found them guilty and sentenced them to die. Simon of Cyrene approached Pilate with a basin of water to wash, but Pilate flung it onto the floor. "They are guilty no less, and I am not washing my hands," remarked Pilate. Demas' mother who was present during the trial, was so distraught with the verdict. She ran towards Pilate and prostrated herself before his feet. "Please, Your Excellency, please forgive my son. Death is too harsh a punishment for him. He is my only son." But Pilate already made up his mind. His leg shoved the woman's face away from him. Thus, so distraught, Demas' mother succumbed to a fatal heart attack. Demas ran towards her. He felt guilty for her death and screamed in anguish. "Forgive me, mother. Please forgive me," he exclaimed as he clutched his dead mother in his chest. Narcissus snapped his finger, and 2 soldiers pulled Demas from his mother and locked up both him and Hestus. Meanwhile, it was good for Narcissus to see Camilla, his former nanny, and Mateo again in Judea. Even Camilla's youngest daughter, Zenaida, was also present. The family became very successful in the clothing business. The family was honored to have a Roman officer in their home as a guest. Later on that night, like the good times, Camilla repeated her bedtime stories of biblical tales. The Philistine army had their champion Goliath, but the army of Israel had none. No one dared to answer the challenge of Goliath. However, an Israeli youth named David bravely answered the call. Goliath laughed at the puny boy. David picked up a stone and put it in his sling and started to swing wildly. Swoosh! As the stone flew, it landed between Goliath's eyes. The giant fell unconscious to the ground with a loud thud. David drew a sword from one of the soldiers and he severed Goliath's head. He grabbed Goliath's head and raised it up in front of the Israeli soldiers. A thunderous shout was heard. The Israeli soldiers drew their swords and routed the Philistines. This was Narcissus' favorite story as a young boy. However, his childhood friend Mateo had changed dramatically. When he met a Jewish prophet named Jesus, Mateo was not the same since he became a painful decision to give up all his material possessions. He had become a devout follower of Jesus. He dressed in rags, but still it was night full of joy and reminiscences. Later, Malchus informed Narcissus that the palace guards that night were going to apprehend this Jesus suspected for subversive actions. Narcissus recalled that this man entered Jerusalem previously in a donkey amidst cheering throngs of people. Narcissus accompanied Malchus to apprehend Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. They were led by another Jew named Judas, who would identify Jesus. They surrounded the area stealthily. They were supposed to attack simultaneously to prevent the criminals from escaping. They noticed one man intensely praying while the rest of the group was sleeping soundly. Malchus instructed his troops, "Wait for the constellation Scorpio to be directly up above to give us more light." At that moment, a lighted arrow was shot in the air to give the signal. Narcissus followed Malchus, who led the attack. Jesus was identified and apprehended. But Narcissus was surprised to see Mateo still dressed in rags with the group. Mateo ran away even though the guards ripped off his clothes, so he practically escaped totally naked. However, a fanatical follower of Jesus cut off Malchus' ear. However, Jesus immediately healed him. Then the soldiers led Jesus away. Narcissus observed the trial of Jesus with Pilate with total boredom before another routine trial and perhaps another execution. His soldiers chastised Jesus per the instruction of Pilate. Every time the lash fell on Jesus' back, the crowd cheered. "Give him more," they shouted. So every time this happened, Mary, the mother of Jesus, would recall her body at the sting of the whip on her son's skin. These were to happen 40 times. She did not look at her son. She was staring at and begging Narcissus. A dagger would pierce her heart every time the lash fell. She pleaded with her eyes, saying, "Please, sir, please stop the torture of my son. He is my only son, and he is innocent." Narcissus did so much to ignore her, since he did not have the intestinal fortitude to look at her. At the 30th whipping, Narcissus shouted, "Stop!" He signaled to the soldier to curtail the strokes, lest Jesus would die prematurely due to loss of blood. End of part 1 of 8.